The sheriff's voice carries across the school parking lot, and every parent within 50 feet turns to look. His finger is pointed at my chest. His other hand rests on his belt, casual and practiced, the way men stand when they have never once been afraid of the person in front of them. My 8-year-old daughter's fingers tighten around mine. He is telling me loudly that women like me need to learn some respect. That he will be keeping an eye on me from now on. And I stand there and take it. All of it. Because the truth he cannot see is that I have ended careers for less in this. I have made judges wait in hallways. Once, in another life, an entire empire learned to lower its voice when I entered a room. But my daughter is watching. So I say nothing. He thinks I am a powerless single mother who got caught losing her temper in a parking lot. He has no idea that the woman he is humiliating in front of her own child once made grown men go quiet with a single glance. And here is the part that still keeps me up at night. I let him do it. I stood there in front of half the town and let a man who knew nothing about me decide exactly what I was, because the alternative was worse. The alternative was my daughter learning, at 8 years old, what her mother used to be. My name is Mara Ellison. At least, that is the name on the lease of my studio, on my driver's license, on the parent contact form at Larkspur Elementary. I am 32 years old. I own a small custom stationery and invitation shop called Paper and Pine, 1 block off the main street of a mountain town most people only ever see from a highway. I have lived here 7 years. I pay my taxes early. I return my library books on time. I am, by every measurable standard, the most ordinary woman you will ever meet. That ordinariness is not an accident. I built it the way other people build houses, brick by careful brick. I open the shop at 8 every morning before taking June to school. I hand-cut invitations for weddings and anniversaries, and I letter every envelope myself because machines cannot do what my hands were trained to do. People in town know me as the quiet woman who makes beautiful paper. The single mom who brings muffins to school fundraisers. Nobody looks twice at a woman like that. That is the entire point. June is 8. She has my dark hair and her own laugh, a laugh that starts in her belly and fills every room it enters. She believes the most dangerous thing her mother has ever done is cut herself with a paper trimmer. She believes our life began the day we moved into the little blue house on Chestnut Street. She believes a lot of things, and I have spent 7 years making sure she can keep believing them. Every morning, I braid her hair. Every afternoon, I am standing at the school gate at 3 o'clock sharp. That is the rhythm of our life, and I protect it like a heartbeat. I have exactly one rule that sits above every other rule in my life. Nobody from my past ever learns where I live, not where I sleep, not where my daughter goes to school, not the name of the town painted on the water tower. I pay cash when I can. I stay out of photographs. When the library posted pictures from the spring festival earlier this year, I checked every single one and felt relieved that June and I had stayed out to frame. Or so I believed. I will come back to that later because it matters more than I could possibly have known. The afternoon everything started was a Tuesday, ordinary in every way a Tuesday can be. I picked June up at 3. She climbed into the car talking about a spelling test and a class hamster, and whether we could get pizza on Friday. I remember thinking, as I pulled out of the school lot, that this was a good life, a quiet life. The kind of life I had crossed an ocean of bad decisions to reach. Nothing about that afternoon suggested that everything I had built was about to crack open. Nothing ever does. That is how these days arrive. They come disguised as every other day. We stopped at the market on the way home for milk, and June asked if she could ride her scooter the last stretch while I locked up the car. I said yes, the way I always do, because the sidewalk on that block is flat and empty at 4 in the afternoon. I had the keys in the door when I heard the sound. Metal on metal, small but sharp. June's handlebar had clipped the mirror of a parked pickup truck and folded it against the door. She froze. She is a child who apologizes to furniture when she bumps into it. She was already reaching for the mirror to fix it when the truck's owner came out of the hardware store. His name is Harlan Boyce. He owns half the commercial property on Main Street, and he carries himself like a man who has never been told no by anyone smaller than him. He crossed the sidewalk in 4 strides and grabbed June's backpack by his strap hard enough to jerk her backward. "Do you have any idea what that costs?" he said. His voice had that particular public volume men use when they want an audience. I moved before I thought. I put myself between him and my daughter, and I said very quietly, "Take your hand off her." And I watched him decide, in real time, that a small woman with flour on her apron was not someone he needed to listen to. That is the moment Sheriff Dale Callahan drove past. He saw a shouting man, a frightened child, and a woman with her hand closed around the wrist of one of the most prominent business owners in the county. He did not see the backpack. He did not see June's face. He saw exactly 1 second of a story and wrote the rest of it himself. His cruiser pulled to the curb, and I felt that old, cold part of me wake up, the part that reads a scene the way other people read headlines. I made myself put it back to sleep. That part of me has no place on a sidewalk next to my daughter. Boyce let go of June the moment he saw the uniform, and suddenly he was all reason and injury. She attacked me, he said. Unbelievable, right, in broad daylight. I said nothing, because June was pressed against my side and shaking. Callahan looked at the truck mirror, then at me, then at the small crowd gathering outside the market. Ma'am, step away from him. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. He had the particular confidence of a man holding the only authority in the room. I stepped back. He took that as guilt. Men like him always do. He lectured me on that sidewalk for 4 full minutes. I know, because June counted later, the way children count things that frighten them. He told me this town did not need people who solve problems with their hands. He told me a mother should model better behavior for her child. He said the words young lady and little lady 4 separate times, each one softer and sharper than the last, while neighbors I have made wedding invitations for watched from the curb, and one of them raised a phone. I stood with my hands at my sides and my chin level, and I let every word land. You want to know the truth? I could have ended it with 1 sentence. 1 name, spoken quietly enough that only he would hear it, and Dale Callahan would have gone pale in front of everyone. I know things about the men who built this county that would fold his understanding of the world in half. I stood 6 feet from him holding a detonator he could not see. And then I looked down at my daughter. I saw her eyes, wide and wet and fixed on my face, waiting to learn from me how scared she was allowed to be. And I chose her. I will always choose her. I apologized to Harlan Boyce on that sidewalk. I said the words clearly, the way the sheriff instructed, and I offered to pay for the mirror out of the till, and Boyce accepted with the satisfied nod of a man who had just taught somebody their place. Callahan wrote me a warning for disorderly conduct, tore it from his pad, and held it out like a lesson. We will be keeping an eye on you, he said, loudly. For the audience, I folded the paper into my apron pocket, took June's hand, and walked her home past every watching face in town. In the car, June was quiet for 3 blocks. Then she asked the question that broke me, the question no warning ticket could ever be sharp enough to match. Mommy, she said, did you do something wrong? Her voice was so small. My daughter, who has watched me open pickle jars and fix the studio toilet and carry 50-pound boxes of cardstock like they weighed nothing, it just watched a man talk to me like I was nobody, and she was trying to understand what kind of woman her mother really was. I told her no, baby. Sometimes adults make mistakes about people. I did not tell her which adult I meant. That night she fell asleep with her light on, which she had not done in 2 years, and I stood in her doorway for a long time listening to her breathe. I faced down armed men across negotiating tables and never once felt my hands shake. My daughter's nightlight undid me completely. That night I made June's favorite dinner and helped with her spelling words and read 2 chapters of her book instead of 1. It kept my voice warm and steady through all of it, because steadiness is a skill, and like every skill I own, I learned it in a life she knows nothing about. When she finally slept, I sat at the kitchen table in the dark and let myself feel it. Not the sheriff's words. Words from a stranger cannot cut a woman who has sat across tables from actual wolves. What cut me was June's face. My daughter had watched the world teach her that her mother was small. Around midnight, I took the box down from the closet shelf. It is nothing remarkable to look at, a plain tin box with a lock, the kind you can buy in any hardware store. Inside is a single photograph and chess piece. The photograph shows a younger me standing on the steps of a stone building in a city 200 miles from here, flanked by men whose names still open doors I will never walk through again. I am 24 in that picture. I am wearing a gray coat and an expression I do not allow myself anymore. The chess piece is a black queen carved from ebony. My father gave it to me when I was 9. I will not say my old name yet. You will understand it soon enough, the way Sheriff Callahan eventually did, piece by piece. What matters tonight is this. I looked at that photograph for a long time, and then I put it away, the way I always do, and I told myself the same thing I have told myself every night for 7 years. Tomorrow will be ordinary. The town will forget by Friday. June will forget by summer. I believed it, too. I want you to know that. I genuinely believed a warning ticket was the worst thing that Tuesday had brought into our lives. I was wrong, and I found out at closing time the next day. I locked up the shop at 6, and there on the doorstep, placed exactly in the center of the mat where I could not possibly miss it, was a chess piece, a white queen. Not mine. Mine was in the tin box at home, and this one was new, glossy, store-bought, left by someone who wanted me to know 2 things at once. They knew what they used to be. and they knew where to find me. I stood on my own doorstep with my keys in my hand and 7 years of quiet folded up like a paper crane. Most people would have called the police. I want you to sit with that irony for a moment, because I certainly did. Instead, I picked the piece up, dropped it in my pocket, and walked the long way home, counting reflections in shop windows the way my father taught me when I was younger. In June, a gray sedan I did not recognize had been parked across from the school that afternoon. A man had asked the woman at the bakery about the stationery lady that morning. I know because she mentioned it to me, laughing, thinking it was a customer. Nobody new comes to Larkspur in October. Nobody. That night, after June was asleep, I opened the back panel of the hallway closet and took out a phone that had been switched off for 7 years. It held one contact. Nadia answered on the second ring, and she did not say hello. She said my old name, soft and disbelieving, the way you say the name of someone you buried. I told her someone had found me. I told her about the chess piece. There was a long silence on the line, and then she said the thing I already knew and did not want to hear. They left a message, she said. They want something. Dead women do not get messages. I did not sleep much that night. I sat in the dark of my ordinary kitchen, in my ordinary house, on my ordinary street, and I laid out my options the way I once laid out far more dangerous boards. Run again. New name, new town, new life. In June, learning at 8 years old that home is a thing that can be taken. Stay and wait and let strangers decide the timeline. Or stand still and find out who is holding the other end of this thread before they decide to pull it. I have never been good at waiting. It is, if I am honest, the one flaw that survived both of my lives. On Thursday, Sheriff Callahan's cruiser sat parked across from my studio for 40 minutes. He did not come in. He just watched, and I watched him watch my shop while I lettered a set of christening invitations with a perfectly steady hand. Here is what I did not know then and only learned later from him. He had gone home Tuesday night and written his report, and something about it would not sit still in his head. It was my face, he told me eventually. The whole town watched a man humiliate me in public, he said, and I never once looked afraid. He has spent 20 years reading people. He said, I looked like someone counting exits. He was right about that, for the record. I had counted the exits on that sidewalk before he finished his first sentence. Old training is like a heartbeat. You do not choose it. It just goes on. What he did next was what any careful officer does when a person does not add up. He looked closer at the paperwork. My studio license. My lease. The complaint Boyce filed. And somewhere in that stack of ordinary paper, he found the one thread I had left loose 7 years ago, the one thing in my entire constructed life with a real name stitched into it. The corporate filing for paper and pine had been notarized long ago through an old shell company. The shell meant nothing by itself. But the name on its original registration filed in a state 200 miles away was a name that had not been spoken in daylight for 7 years. Devereaux. I know the exact shape of what happened next because Callahan told me everything later, sitting at my kitchen table with his hat in his hands like a man confessing. He searched the name expecting nothing. What he found instead was a legend. Old news, archives from a coastal city. A mafia organization that had run ports and unions and half the county contracts for 30 years. And at the very top of it, for 3 brief and infamous years, a mafia boss nobody could photograph, nobody could name, and everybody feared. They called her the Queen. The papers loved it. A boss who never appeared, never gave statements, never got caught on a wiretap, who settled wars between families with a phone call and once, famously, ended a dock strike with a single handwritten note delivered to 5 offices at the same hour. And then, 7 years ago, she vanished. A car was pulled from the river with her effects inside. The organization held a funeral with an empty casket and announced that a council would govern in her place. Half the underworld believed she was dead. The other half believed she had run. Everyone agreed on one thing. Nobody walks away from that chair. And yet somebody had. Callahan found one photograph. Just one, buried in a society page of all places, a charity gala from a decade ago. A young woman in a gray coat on the steps of a concert hall, half turned from the camera, surrounded by men, the caption identified as shipping magnates and city officials. The caption did not name her. The caption did not have to. He told me he looked at that photograph for a very long time. Then he pulled up the filing for my studio again. Then he did the thing rational men do. He decided it was a coincidence. The stationary woman in Larkspur could not possibly be a dead mafia boss. Dead women do not run paper shops. He almost let it go. He told me that, too. What stopped him was an old sealed record, a federal filing connected to the river recovery that listed one surviving witness statement. The witness was a man named Ollie Granger, a dock worker from the old city who had retired, of all places, to a trailer outside Larkspur. Callahan drove out with the photograph. He told me Ollie went gray before he even finished looking at it. The old man would not say the name. He just closed his door and said one sentence through the screen, and Callahan said he could still hear the fear in it. "You do not knock on that door, Sheriff. Whoever she is now, you leave her be." That was the moment it stopped being a coincidence for him. The retired dock worker in a trailer park knew exactly whose face was in that photograph, and his first instinct was terror. Callahan drove home, sat in his driveway for an hour, and tried to make the pieces form any other shape. The quiet woman he had lectured on a sidewalk in front of her child. The single mother he had threatened with a warning ticket. The queen. The woman an entire criminal empire had buried with an empty casket. He told me he felt something then that he had not felt in 20 years of law enforcement. He felt like a man who had spent a week shouting at the ocean. He came to my house on Friday evening. I knew why the moment I saw his face through the window, the way you know weather. I sent June upstairs with her headphones and her tablet and met him on the porch with the door closed behind me. He did not touch his belt this time. He stood at the bottom of my steps holding a manila folder, and he looked at me like I was a stranger wearing a familiar face. "I know who you are," he said, not accusing, almost apologizing. I did not insult his work by lying. I said, "I know you do." And then I asked him the only thing that mattered. "Who else knows?" "Just me," he said. The search was off the books. If the county system, nothing flagged. I studied him the way I used to study men across far worse tables, and I believed him, and some small part of me unclenched for the first time in 3 days. Then he asked his question. Not about the organization, not about the river or the casket, or 30 years of crimes he could not prove. He asked the one question that told me who Dale Callahan actually was. "Why did you let me do it?" he said. "Out there on the sidewalk. Why did you let me treat you like you were powerless?" I looked at this man who had humiliated me in front of my daughter and half the town, and I gave him the truest answer I have ever given anyone. "Because she was standing beside me," I said. "Because my daughter was watching, and she has never seen her mother be anything but gentle, and I would rather swallow your lecture 100 times than have her learn, at 8 years old, that there is a version of me that makes men like you afraid." He did not say anything for a long moment. The porch light hummed. Somewhere down Chestnut Street, a dog barked twice and stopped. I watched him do the arithmetic that honest men do when the world hands them an answer they did not want, a slow recalculation of every assumption he had walked up my steps carrying. Then he set the folder on my railing, and he said, "Tell me the rest. Not show me the rest. Not prove the rest. Tell me." It was the first time anyone from this life had asked me for my own story instead of digging it up behind my back. And I remember standing there in the porch light thinking that this was either the beginning of my rescue or the beginning of my arrest. I did not tell him on the porch. I told him Saturday morning at my kitchen table after June went to her friend's house for a play date. I told him I was born into that world, not recruited into it. My father ran the organization's books for 30 years and believed, in the way of old men, that the family was protection and tradition and pride. When he died, the council did not choose me because I was fierce. They chose me because I was the only person every faction trusted to be fair. I was 25. For 3 years I kept the peace between men who had been enemies since before I was born. I was very good at it. That is not a boast. It is the thing I have spent 7 years trying to forgive myself for. Then I told him the part he had not found in any record. When I was 26, a lieutenant named Vincent Caro decided the council's new boss was soft. He made his move quietly the way patient men do, and the first pressure he applied was not to me. It was to the people I love. My sister Claire drove a car off a wet road one night on her way to my house. The report called it an accident. The brakes had been serviced the week before. I knew what it was the moment the phone rang. Men like Caro do not leave evidence. They leave messages, and a message does not need proof in any courtroom to be true at your kitchen table at 3 in the morning. Claire left behind a 1-year-old daughter and a husband who drank himself into a grave 4 winters later. The little girl's name was June. She has my dark hair because Claire and I had the same mother. She calls me Mom because I have been her mother since she was 13 months old. Callahan did not move while I told him this. I want you to understand what this cost me to say out loud because I had not said it to a living soul in 7 years. After Claire died, I understood something my father never did. You can hold power with both hands, or you can hold a child. You cannot do both because power makes a target of everything you love. So I made the only move Vincent Caro could never predict. I surrendered. I signed the organization over to the council, stage managed my own death, and drove north through the night with a toddler asleep in the back seat, and everything I was in a box in the trunk. I did not run from that world, Sheriff, I said. I paid for my exit with the only currency it respected. The crown itself. He sat with that for a while. Then he asked the question everyone eventually asks. Why the queen? I almost laughed because the answer is so small. My father taught me chess with a carved set older than I was, and he used to say the queen is the strongest piece on the board and the only one whose job is to protect the smallest one. When the council needed a name for me, I gave them that. I told him I had not been feared because I was cruel. I had been feared because I was patient, and I kept my word, and I never once forgot a debt in either direction. He nodded slowly. And then, he said in a careful voice, someone left a white queen on your doorstep, didn't they? I will not pretend that did not chill me. I had told no one about the chess piece. No one. Which meant Dale Callahan, county sheriff, had been watching my town more closely than I knew. He explained. After Ollie Granger shut the door in his face, he had driven past my street twice a day out of something between duty and dread. He had seen the gray sedan on Tuesday and run its plate, rental out of the city, leased to a name that meant nothing. He had been working toward warning me, he said, before he had decided whether he could even look at me. I believed him. Men who are lying to you do not look that tired. So I told him the rest. The message was not a threat, not exactly. It was a summons. Nadia had spent 2 days pulling quiet threads and called me back on Saturday night with what she had found. Someone on the council had spent a year searching for me, and it was not Vincent Caro. Caro was long gone, dead of his own ambition 4 years ago. The searcher was Sophie Brandt. Callahan watched my face when I said the name, and he asked who she was. I said she was my best friend. She held June at the funeral. She was the only person I almost told. The news sat on my kitchen table between us like a third person, and neither of us knew yet whether it was mercy or a knife. Nadia explained, the way you explain weather moving in. The council I left behind had rotted from the inside the way councils do. 3 factions, 5 money fights, 2 men quietly building private armies under the table. The old network was a ledger book with no one keeping it, and everyone knew it could not hold. And here was the reason they had come, looking for me, the reason a white queen appeared on my doorstep instead of a bullet. My father, in the last year of his life, moved the organization's true reserve off every ledger. A private vault. Cash, property deeds, bearer bonds, 40 years of quiet money. The vault answered to one seal and one voice. Mine. While I lived hidden, it was locked. While I was dead, it was locked. Only the queen, alive, could open it. That was when I finally understood the shape of the trap. Sophie did not want revenge. Sophie wanted a coronation. The factions were at each other's throats, and the council needed the vault to buy peace, and they could not crown a stranger. They needed the legend to come home. The chess piece was an invitation wearing a threat's coat, and the threat underneath it was simple. We know where you are. We know about the girl. Come back on your feet or be carried. I sat in my kitchen in the dark after that call and looked down the hallway toward my daughter's room, and I made the decision I had spent 7 years praying I would never have to make. I told Callahan on Sunday, standing in my studio after hours, surrounded by wedding invitations lettered in gold. I spent years teaching myself how to live without being the queen, I said, but I never forgot how to protect my daughter. I am not going to run again. Running teaches June that home is a thing other people get to take. I am going to end this the way it should have ended 7 years ago. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said the thing that rearranged something in my chest. I do not have to like your past, Mara, he said, to understand a mother protecting her child. Tell me what the law can do, and tell me what it cannot, and I will not confuse the two. There were things the law could not do, and we both knew it. No crime had been committed in his county. No report could protect a child from men who worked in another state's shadows. But there were things it could do, and we did them. June stayed with her friend Willa's family that week, a sleepover that stretched, with 2 parents who thought they were helping a single mom through a work emergency. Callahan quietly moved a patrol pattern past my street at irregular hours, logged nothing, and told no one why. And on Sunday night, I opened the hallway closet, woke the old phone, and called Nadia a second time. Tell them, I said. Tell all of them. The queen is not dead. The queen is not missing. The queen is done hiding. You cannot imagine what those words did. Nadia told me later that the news moved through the organization like weather, from kitchen to clubroom to dock office, and that men who had not spoken my name in 7 years stood up from tables when they heard it. Half of them wept, she said, and she is not a woman given to poetry. The other half went very, very quiet. Sophie answered within the hour. Not a threat this time. A location. The old boathouse above the mill pond, on the county line, 40 minutes from my house, neutral ground between her world and mine. Thursday night. Come alone. I agreed to the place. I did not agree to alone, and neither did the sheriff standing across my studio, though neither of us said so out loud. The hardest part of that week was not the waiting. It was my daughter. On Tuesday, I drove to Willa's house and sat with June on the back steps and told her the first true thing I told her about our life. Baby, I said before you were born, Mommy had a very different life. There are parts of my past I wanted you to grow up without. Some people from that old life have found us, and I have to go talk to them and make it finished. She looked at me with Claire's eyes, and she asked, are they bad people? And I told her the truth again. Some of them. But Mommy is not scared of them. She studied me for a long moment, 8 years old and older than her years, and then she said, you never look scared. Even when the sheriff was mean, you just go quiet. I hugged her so she could not see my face. Thursday night was cold and clear. The boathouse sat at the far end of the mill pond, half sunk in reeds, lit by one lamp. I drove myself. I wore the gray coat. Callahan was not in the room, and I will not tell you where he was, because a man of the law gets to keep some of his secrets too. 12 of them waited inside, men and women I had once governed, older now, hungrier now. And at the center of them, standing beside a folding table with 2 chairs set facing each other like a chessboard, was Sophie Brandt. She had gray at her temples that had not been there 7 years ago. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she did something I had not expected. She bowed her head. The negotiation lasted 4 hours, and I will give you the shape of it rather than the hours. Sophie laid it out plainly. The factions were starving the network, the vault was the only money everyone trusted, and the council would recognize me tonight publicly if I would unseal it and take the chair back. I let the room go, quiet before I answered, the way my father taught me. Silence is a floor, he used to say. Make them stand on it. Then I told them my terms, and I watched a room full of dangerous people realize that 7 years of silence had not made me smaller. It had made me precise. The terms were these. The vault would open once, under my seal, and the money would be divided by the old charter, every faction audited, every man accounted for. The organization would become what my father always claimed it was, a legitimate holding clean books, courts and properties and payrolls, run by a council with Sophie Brandt at its head. My name would anchor the transition for 1 year, and 1 year only. And the first and last and only non-negotiable clause was this. No member, no associate, no friend of a friend ever comes near my town, my shop, or my daughter again. My life here is not part of the estate. It is not leverage. It is not on any board. That was the moment I stopped being their lost queen and became their final lesson. One of the younger lieutenants, a man named Anton with more ambition than memory, decided to test the room. He said, with a smile, that a girl is a pressure point whether we want her to be or not. The temperature of that boathouse changed. I did not raise my voice. I have never once had to. I told him I had buried the most dangerous version of myself for love of that child, and that if he ever made me dig her up, he would spend the rest of his short career learning why the old men in that room had never once interrupted me. Nobody moved. Then Sophie, my oldest friend, stood, walked the length of the table, and put her hand on my shoulder in front of all of them, and said the Queen's word stands. And just like that, 7 years ended. I want to be honest with you about what happened next, because the legend would lie. I did not feel triumphant driving home through the dark. It felt emptied. I had spent one night being the woman I used to be, and she fit, and that frightened me more than any man in that boathouse. The next morning I made pancakes. I braided June's hair when she came home on Friday. I opened the shop at 8 and lettered a set of anniversary invitations, and my hands were steady, and nobody in Larkspur knew that the woman matching envelope liners had settled a criminal empire succession the night before. That is the thing about power used properly. It is indistinguishable from an ordinary morning. The last piece was the sheriff. He came to the studio the following week in the early evening after the lamps on Main Street had come on. He stood in the middle of my shop, hat in his hands again, and he said the thing I had not known I was waiting to hear. I owe you an apology, Mara. Not because of who you turned out to be. I would owe it to you if you were nobody at all. I judged a woman in a parking lot without knowing one true thing about her, and I did it in front of her child, and that is not the man I am supposed to be. I let the silence sit for a breath, because some silences are gifts. Then I said, apology accepted, Dale. But understand something. Respect was never owed to the Queen. It was owed to the woman with flour on her apron. You cannot only see people once they turn out to matter. He has never once treated me like a legend since that day. He treats me like Mara. He stopped by on Saturdays at first with terrible coffee and a genuine interest in whether the Millpond Road needed grading. He is patient with June, who has decided he is acceptable because he knows the names of every dinosaur. Whatever his becomes, it is being built the slow way, out of honesty he had to earn and trust I choose to give, and neither of us is in a hurry. He once told me the strangest part of knowing my story is this. Everyone else who learns it is amazed that you were powerful, he said. I am amazed that you were powerful and chose pancakes. I think about that more than I should. The year of my name passed quietly, the way we agreed. Sophie sends one postcard each Christmas and signed a lighthouse on the front, 2 words on the back. Books balanced. The gray sedan has never come back. The white queen sits on a shelf in my studio now, next to my father's black one, 2 queens from 2 lives, finally facing the same direction. Last month, at the school art show, a visitor from the city went pale looking at me in the hallway. I saw it happen. He said nothing, and I said nothing, and he left town the same night because that is what the word of the queen buys now. Silence and distance in my daughter's ordinary childhood. And June. June knows that mommy had a different life, once with hard people in it, and that mommy ended it so it could never touch her. She does not know the name they called me, and she will not learn it from me. Last spring she took my hand on the walk home from school, out of nowhere the way children do, and said, "I'm proud of you, Mom." I asked her what for. She thought about it very seriously and said, "You always take care of everything." I had to stop walking for a moment, right there on Chestnut Street. 7 years, 2 names, 1 buried crown, and that sentence was the whole of it. My daughter does not need to know the legend to love the woman behind it. That was the plan all along. It just took the whole world finding me to finally prove it.